For most of the 1870s, the revolutionaries of Russia were not revolutionaries in any violent sense. They were students, doctors, and teachers who dressed in peasant clothes, went into the countryside, and tried to reach the people, running illegal schools, treating the sick, passing pamphlets hand to hand in the dark. The Tsarist state's response was to hunt them down, lock hundreds of them in cells for years without trial, and flog political prisoners in prison yards until they lost their minds. By the end of that decade, the peaceful ones were dead, imprisoned, or exiled to Siberia. What came next was not a choice. It was an answer. One of the people who lived through every stage of that process, from the villages to the underground to the prison cell, was a woman named Vera Figner. Figner was born in 1852 into a noble family in Kazan province. She came of age in a Russia where serfdom had just been abolished, on paper. Alexander II freed the peasants from their landowners in 1861 and called it liberation. But the freed peasants owed the state redemption payments for the land they worked, in installments stretching decades into the future. The poverty stayed exactly where it was. She wanted to study medicine. Russian universities didn't admit women, so in 1872 she traveled to Zurich. When she returned, she took a post as a medical assistant in Samara province, responsible for 12 peasant villages. She was not looking for revolution. She was looking for a way to be useful within the limits the system allowed, limits that left no room for opposition parties, no free press, and no legal mechanism through which ordinary Russians could challenge the will of the Tsar. To organize, to publish, to gather, any of it came with the risk of arrest. Those were the limits Figner, and an entire generation like her, tried to work within, for a time. In the spring of 1874, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 young Russians made the same bet Figner had. They left the cities, dressed in peasant clothes, and walked into villages across Russia, trying to reach the peasantry directly. They called it going to the people. The peasants were the largest class in the country, and if they could be moved, everything could change. What they found was indifference. The peasants were deeply orthodox, suspicious of outsiders, and largely unmoved. Many reported their visitors straight to the police. Over 700 people were arrested that summer alone. Figner continued her medical work in Samara province, while investigators opened files on over 1,600 suspects across the country. Hundreds sat in pre-trial solitary confinement for years. By the time the state put 193 of them on trial in October 1877, the largest political trial in the history of Tsarist Russia, 97 of the original defendants had already died or lost their minds in those cells. The trial ended in mass acquittals. The defendants used every minute in the dock to speak, and their speeches were printed underground and passed across Russia. But no verdict could undo what the state had already demonstrated. An entire generation had watched the cost of peaceful organizing play out in open court. The bet that peaceful change was possible had not yet been abandoned, but it was running out of evidence. Then, in the same year as the trial, one incident removed whatever was left of that evidence. A political prisoner named Arkhip Bogolyubov was being held in a St. Petersburg detention center alongside many of the trial of the 193 defendants. In July 1877, Governor General Fyodor Trepov walked through the prison yard on an inspection. Bogolyubov failed to remove his cap. Trepov ordered him flogged on the spot. It was the first flogging of a member of the Russian intelligentsia in the entire 19th century, and it was severe enough to drive Bogolyubov permanently insane. An educated man, held without conviction, beaten into madness by a government official who faced no consequence for it. 6 months later, on January 24th, 1878, a young woman named Vera Zasulich walked into Trepov's office posing as a petitioner and shot him. He survived. The government put her before a jury, expecting a show of public loyalty to the state. The jury acquitted her. The crowd outside the courthouse cheered. For those who had spent years arguing that violence was both wrong and unnecessary, that the system could be moved through legitimate means, these two events arriving months apart made that argument almost impossible to hold. The state had beaten an innocent man into insanity without consequence. The public had then refused to convict the woman who shot the man responsible. The ground beneath the peaceful faction had shifted in a way it would not shift back. Figner was still in the villages, still treating patients, still trying to reach the peasants through the slow work of trust. But by 1878, the movement she was part of was fracturing. She joined Zemlya I Volya, Land and Freedom, the main revolutionary organization still committed to peaceful methods. The arrests had not stopped. The peasants were not rising, and the organizations that tried to rebuild after each wave of arrests were being dismantled faster than new ones could be formed. The question the movement was asking itself by 1879 was not theoretical, it was personal. A decade of sacrifice had produced nothing that lasted. Friends had died in cells before trial. Others had been flogged into madness. Others were in Siberia. What exactly was the peaceful path still offering? In June 1879, about 20 members of Zemlya I Volya gathered secretly near Voronezh to confront that question directly. The faction led by Georgy Plekhanov held that terrorism was a dead end and that the movement should continue working among the people. They went on to form Black Repartition and eventually drifted toward Marxism. The other faction said the evidence was conclusive. They formed Narodnaya Volya, the people's will. Vera Figner joined its executive committee. She had spent years in the villages and had nothing to show for it except a precise knowledge of what the state was prepared to do to anyone who tried. The committee had fewer than 100 members. Their program was the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. Inside people's will, the life Figner had known gave way entirely to the underground. Members lived under false identities, moved constantly to stay ahead of the Okhrana, and watched their organization contract with every wave of arrests. They attempted to kill Alexander II 3 times before they succeeded. A bomb planted beneath a street on his regular route, an attempt to blow up the imperial train near Moscow, an explosion inside the Winter Palace. All 3 failed. Each attempt cost them more people, and each arrest tightened the circle around those who remained. By early 1881, people's will was running out of both time and members. Their leader, Andrei Zhelyabov, was arrested on February 28th, 2 days before the planned operation. Sofia Perovskaya took command. On the morning of March 13th, 1881, Alexander II kept to his Sunday routine. Church, then the riding academy at Mikhailovsky Manege, then back toward the Winter Palace through the streets of St. Petersburg. People's will had 4 bomb throwers positioned along his route. The first bomb, thrown by Nikolai Rysakov, struck the Tsar's carriage, a bulletproof coach, a gift from Napoleon III of France. Alexander was unhurt. He stepped out of the carriage to check on the wounded bystanders in the street. Ignacy Hrniewicki stepped forward and threw the second bomb at the Tsar's feet. Alexander II died that afternoon. Hrniewicki died the same day from his own wounds. He was 24 or 25 years old. Perovskaya had drawn the positions of the bomb throwers herself and given the signal with her hand. 6 weeks later, she was publicly hanged in St. Petersburg, aged 27, the first woman in Russian history to be executed for a political crime. On the morning he was killed, Alexander II had approved a proposal for cautious political reform, consultative assemblies, a limited expansion of participation. His son, Alexander III, published the Manifesto on Unshakable Autocracy within weeks. He expanded the Okhrana, gave them authority to arrest without jury and exile without appeal, and banned 14 major newspapers in 7 years. The door didn't just close, it was bolted from the inside. For Vera Figner, that crackdown was not an abstraction. She was still inside Russia, still underground, still running. With Perovskaya hanged and Zhelyabov hanged, and most of the executive committee gone, she was what remained of people's will. She held the organization together across southern Russia for nearly 2 more years before the Okhrana caught her on February 10th, 1883. She spent 20 months in pre-trial solitary confinement. In September 1884, a military tribunal sentenced her to death. The sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. She was transferred to Shlisselburg Fortress, where she would spend the next 20 years. She wrote that when she first arrived and looked up at the fortress walls, she noticed a golden key painted on one of the towers. It seemed to say, she wrote, that there would be no coming out. She was released in 1904 and lived until 1942. The organization she had given everything to was long gone. The state it had tried to break had grown harder and more repressive in the years after the assassination. The Tsar they had killed had been replaced by one who used the murder as justification for everything that followed. People's Will had fewer than 100 members, and it killed the most powerful man in the country. What it could not do was determine what came after. These were not people who chose violence first. They spent a decade in the villages and the courts and the cells, trying every other path. The state closed each one. By 1879, the peaceful wing of the Russian revolutionary movement had nothing to show for 10 years of work except a clear record of what the Tsarist state was prepared to do to anyone who challenged it. Terrorism was not their ideology. It was their conclusion.